Hello everybody and welcome back to a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I'm the host, and if this is your first time clicking on, thank you so much for clicking on. If you have just wandered into my little corner of the YouTube or podcasting world, thanks so much. Basically, I do what it says on the tin and do a different book every week. This week being a little different, of course, in that it is a list. I put together a list of my 30 favorite books of the 20th century. Counted them down across 3 episodes, and today is going to be 10 to 1. So probably the most exciting of the 3 episodes, of course, getting my top 10 favorite books of the 20th century out there. But yeah, if you've just joined me, if you'd like to follow me full time, please click the duck in the corner and subscribe. Or if you're on traditional podcast platforms, click follow. But as always, though, it's a free podcast. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks everyone for clicking on. I really hope you enjoy the episode. I hope you enjoy the list. Let me know your favorite books as well if you'd like to. I'd love to see that. If they differ, if you disagree, let me know. That would be fun as well. But as always, yeah, I just hope we're all well. I hope everyone's got a nice cup of tea or cup of coffee or something. I hope everyone's reading some really great books and just, yeah, living the life that they want to live. So thank you guys for clicking on, and I think it's time to start counting down books 10 to 1. Okay, like I said, books 10 to 1. First, I'm going to touch on some of the rules, which I've touched on in every other episode. Once an author appeared on the list, they were not allowed to appear again because, obviously I've got a favorite author. I'm sure everyone has a favorite author and they probably like multiple books from that author. So if I just did that, my top 10 would probably be 3 or 4 books from this particular author, and then my second favorite author would also get 3 or 4 books, and then the list is pretty much done. So 1 book per author. And then to stop me going down rabbit holes just over explaining the books, I've tried to sum them up in 3 words. The first 3 words that I thought of when I wrote the books down on this piece of paper on the list in my little notebook. The first 3 words that came to mind, and that's just to stop me, going too overboard in explaining them. Obviously, I'll speak about them a bit and why I sort of picked those words, but the first 3 words. I've also, in this episode, I am going to have an honourable mentions, and this is because I put this list together 3 months ago. Or 4 months ago, really, because I put it together ahead of time, then recorded the episode each month. And over the course of the last 4 months, I have realized that I left certain books off and certain authors off that I would like represented on the list, which was, I think, annoying, but also kind of fascinating how some authors can be so front of mind for some things and then just completely forgotten and overlooked in other things for no particular reason other than I just couldn't remember all the books that I've ever read. And so, yeah, that's just an opportunity to touch on them. So I'll do the first 7 books, I think, then I'll do the honourable mentions, and then I'll do the final 3 books just to build a bit of tension because we're having a good time here. So let's get into it. First book number 10, counting down. Sula by Toni Morrison. My 3 words were friendship, honesty, and betrayal. Really, really fascinating story. I've read it 2 or 3 times now. I think I've read it twice and listened to it once. And the first time you kind of read it and you're like, okay, that was an interesting story. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time reading it. And then you read it a second time and you're like, that was a bit wacky. That was a bit wonderful. That was really interesting. That was different from my first read. And then the third time you're like, what the hell is going on here? And it's just a story that seems to be, I just thought of Donkey from Shrek being like, Shrek being like, ogres are like onions. They have layers, peel them back. And that kind of feels like what this story is. There's a lot of layers to peel back. On the surface, it's a really fascinating and interesting story about this woman, Sula, and the life that she lives. And then it's kind of like once you've understood it the first time reading, you sort of start to notice background characters and things that take place that you're like, oh, that was really intense and really brutal, or they're really weird standing over there in the corner. So it was this kind of story that was really great the first read and, made me want to reread it a second time. And then the second time I sort of got into the story a lot more and sort of could see the story from a greater perspective, that it just made it a completely different story the second read, but no less enjoyable, if anything, just so much more enjoyable. So that's my number 10, Sula by Toni Morrison. Number 9. Now this was originally 6 on the list. If you've listened to last month's episode, the book that is now 6 was originally 12th and then got bumped to 9th and then got bumped to 6th. And 6th place got bumped to 9th. So this is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Jealousy, Deception, and Mystery. This is the most recent addition to the list, and not in terms of publication date because it was published a fair while ago, but in terms of books that I've read recently that have cracked the top 10. Look, I don't know if it would be there long term, but the fact that it's still quite front of mind in my mind, having just read it a few months ago, it was incredible. I mean, I'd read Daphne du Maurier for uni and I couldn't remember her at all. And then I turned and read Rebecca, and it was just such a cool story. And I think what made it even more wicked was the fact that I had no idea there was a twist coming, and then the twist just came out of nowhere and changed the entire dynamic of the story. And it's just such a wonderful thing where you have this story and it's a great story and so much has gone on and everything's believable, and then in a couple of lines there's a twist and suddenly the entire dynamic of the story has shifted. Everything you've read has shifted. It still makes complete sense. If anything, it makes more sense. Not that you were even confused in the first sort of 3/4 of the book. And then it just makes the last quarter of the book so intense and wonderful as well. I'm trying to speak about that without touching on any of the mystery or any of the general story. So go check that out. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Very, very readable book, but very, very high quality writing style as well, and really enjoyable, but very, very readable. I really liked that about it. It was a very, very readable book. I realize I've actually got a fair amount of the books here on the side here. I hid them so you couldn't see them. The next book I've got, Giovani's Room, number 8 by James Baldwin. My favorite of the James Baldwins, my 3 words are desire, shame, and love. Really beautifully devastating story. That probably could have been 2 of the 3 words as well. Beautifully devastating. It's about a man that sort of starts a relationship with another man, even though he's got a girlfriend. The girlfriend's out of town, and then when she comes back to town, he sort of got to, I guess, make a decision with what he's going to do with his life. You know, does he acknowledge the fact that he's had these feelings for men and has continually had feelings for men, or does he sort of pick the safe route and choose his girlfriend? And it's absolutely devastating. It's absolutely brutal, and there's still elements of beauty. James Baldwin's writing style is also just one of the pearls of this story as well, because he is just a phenomenal writer. I couldn't recommend James Baldwin more, but this for me is, I think, his best and my favorite. It's also one of his shorter ones. It's only 150 pages, so it's an incredibly tight, very economical story that is very, very well written. I mean, James Baldwin is an absolute master of the pen. This next book is technically not a story. It's A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemmingway. Yeah, I don't know. Paris youth writing, they're my 3 words. I love this story. I mean, I love other books by Hemingway. Some of his actual stories, you know, Fiesta, The Sun Also Rises is probably my next favorite. But I don't know. I think I read this at the right time and it struck me, and it was just so interesting and fresh and wonderful. You know, I read it. It was my first time reading Ernest Hemingway. So just to see his writing style for the first time and that sort of really tight, economical, sparse writing style was really eye-opening, and I instantly fell in love with it. Super cringy as well. You know, like the first time I read this, I was early 20s in Paris myself. Yuck, cliche, I know. But did have a huge effect on me, and I absolutely love to revisit this book. I think it's just the fact that he mentions streets and buildings and cafes just really makes it feel like this wonderful historical piece that you can live through a little bit as well when you've ventured to Paris, if you ever venture to Paris. And it makes it this really enjoyable story. What were my 3 words? Paris youth and writing. I mean, yeah, that sort of sums up my experience reading it, sums up his experience living it. So I sort of briefly said that it's about Ernest Hemingway's actual experiences living in Paris as a writer in the 20s, in his early 20s as well. So A Moveable Feast, the Woody Allen film sort of is loosely based off this. What's that called? Midnight in Paris, which is an absolutely charming story. I know Woody Allen's obviously got some issues that a lot of people don't agree with, but nonetheless, the story, the film is quite charming. So go check that out if you want. Number 6 on the list, the book that was 9th, that was originally 12th, that has been bumped up and bumped up and bumped up. This is for me quite a contentious one, just for my own reason. It's To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. My 3 words are loss, memory, and dinner. The reason I think it's contentious is because, again, it's a book I've read relatively recently, and I just, like, Mrs. Dalloway is just so good. but I just can't stop thinking about To the Lighthouse. Since I read it, I just absolutely loved it. And, it's weird. I'm happy with it being here in the top 10, but I think Mrs. Dalloway is better, but I can't get To the Lighthouse out of my mind. So it's making the list. Like I said, loss, memory, and dinner, a wonderful modernist story about loss and memory and going to the lighthouse. The reason dinner's on there, it's a bit of a random one, but I absolutely love the dinner scene in this story because I think the ability of modernism is, sort of being within people's heads, and the ability to float in and out of people's heads through this scene really makes it a wonderful scene to be in and reading, because you see how characters are acting in the front they're putting up, and then all of a sudden you're in their minds and seeing what they're actually thinking behind that front they're putting up, seeing people's reaction to that front and how they respond, but how they're actually thinking as you dip into their mind. It just makes it this really wonderfully complex, enjoyable, fascinating scene that sort of really highlights Virginia Woolf's attention to understand the complexities of human nature and human conversation. And I think that's why it makes the list for this particular scene as well. So To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, I think it's an absolutely fantastic book. It comes in at 6 on the list, and I'm pretty happy with that. Number 5 on the list is Shirley Jackson's And the Haunting of Hill House. My 3 words are isolation, fear, and madness. I did an episode on this book. I've read it, I think, 3 times now. I think it's just a perfect horror story. I mean, the title, it all starts with the title, The Haunting of Hill House, whether you interpret that as Hill House being the object or the subject of the sentence. The placement of the word of there just makes the title so complex and so deep and so wonderful. The story, if you sort of, how you interpret the heading, the title of the story, as whether it's, Hill House being the subject or the object, sort of changes your reading of the story and the dynamic of the story being explored. And that's what I think just makes it so wonderful, is that there are so many elements to this story where you're like, what is going on here? Who's doing the haunting? Is Hill House doing the haunting as this thing that's haunting the people within, or are the people within doing the haunting of Hill House? I love it. It's to me a perfect horror story. I'm not a huge fan of horror fiction because it generally doesn't unnerve me in the way that horror would, but this is such a creepy, wonderful, perfect story. Shirley Jackson is such a fantastic writer. Check out her other stuff as well. The Lottery, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, brilliant stories. But for me, this takes the cake as a perfect horror story. So Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Number 4 on the list, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupery. Wonder, innocence, and beautiful. I read this story probably once every year. It's a very short story. You can probably read it in an hour and a half, if not faster. I think this one probably would get a lot of eye rolls if people said, this is one of my favorite books. It feels like one of those books where you introduce someone to literature, you say, read this story, because I think everyone's kind of read this story, but if everyone's read it, then it must be doing something right. I think I just picked this one. I think Antoine de Saint-Exupery is a phenomenal writer, and he's very underrated as a writer outside of The Little Prince. Go check out Wind, Sound and Stars if you want to sort of get the antecedents of The Little Prince, the true story behind The Little Prince. Antoine de Saint-Exupery's actual experiences in crashing a plane in the desert and the antecedents of what went on to become The Little Prince. Go read that if you're interested in that, because he is a phenomenal writer, one of the best writers I think ever. But The Little Prince is just so wonderful. It's so charming. It's so honest. And it's one of those stories where if you're sort of like stuck in the monotony of everyday life and, the 9 to 5, going to work, coming home, all this, all that, if you read this story, it just kind of realigns you with the true beauty of what the human experience should be. And that sounds very, very pretentious, I realize, as I said it. But it is an incredibly beautiful story. And yeah, it sounded pretentious what I said, but I don't take it back, because that's my opinion on the story. Okay, that was the first 7 books 10 to 4. Now I'm going to do the honourable mentions, just because there's a few that maybe deserve to be here. I think the interesting thing I found about curating this list 4 months ago is I've now actually read more books that would, I think, appear within my top 30. The top 10, I think, is pretty much locked in. I'm happy with that. But books 11 to 30 could easily shift. And these are all books that I think should be there or could be there, or that I simply just forgot. First one is appears on a lot of people's lists, Steinbeck. I've never read any of his long stories. I've read The Pearl. I've read Of Mice and Men, Cannery Row. I've never read his longer stuff, and it is something I am very aware of and do want to read more of. I just sort of haven't been in the right headspace or the right mood and haven't wanted to, but I am very aware that he does not appear on this list. I spoke about We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. That could easily replace 1984, but I spoke about that in the last episode. The 2 fantasy books series that I've read for the podcast and I'm still currently reading, Book of the New Sun by Gene Woolf, could absolutely be on this list because it is a phenomenal Arc de Triomphe. It is an absolute masterpiece and wonderful story. And the Gormenghast, I'd say trilogy, but actually just the first 2 books by Mervyn Peake. Absolute beautiful pieces of art and literature as well. The Notebooks of Multi-Lurid Bridge, or Brig, depending on how you want to pronounce it, I don't know how you pronounce it, by Rainer Maria Rilke, is a really fun book that I kind of overlooked because I don't know if it deserves to be here. It kind of really doesn't have a storyline, but the writing is just absolutely phenomenal. And Rilke, of course, is just an incredibly beautiful poet, but his collection of 10 letters to a young poet is just an absolute force of literature. Tree of Man by Patrick White, just one I kind of forgot about, to be honest, that could easily be on this list because that is a brutal, beautiful story about Australia. Another one, this one surprised me. I have no idea how I forgot this. Maya Angelou. I have no idea how I forgot Maya Angelou because I've been considering her for another episode and I've been actively looking at her book on my shelf. And it was just, as soon as it dawned on me that I'd left her off the list, I was like, how can I have her so front of mind for an episode and just completely overlook her for something else? And it was just kind of fascinating how when you're sort of thinking in episodes, you can completely forget what you're doing in different episodes. And I guess it's just, I'm trying to explain my way out of my own tunnel vision here, but she definitely deserves, I know why the Cage Bird Sings definitely deserves to be in my top 30 and would be in my top 30 had I not forgotten her. So I wanted to say that. But now let's get into the final 3 books. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. My 3 words: secret, guilt, and justice. Really cool story. It's, one of the top selling books of all time. It's her most famous book of all time. I think Agatha Christie is one of my great comfort reads because her stories are going to be about 200 pages long. You're going to be absolutely mesmerized and wowed and confused, and then it's all going to come to a really nice tight end. The wonderful thing about this is there's no detective in this detective story. It's a bunch of 10 strangers go to an island and one by one they start dropping dead, and it becomes this real psychologically terror, pressure-filled story of who's doing it, because we're all technically innocent, but we don't know each other enough to claim innocence. And obviously, maybe there's someone else on the island doing it, maybe it's one of us, and so all the pressure just kind of mounts from there. I kind of really love it because it kind of takes this subgenre of mystery and kind of just owns it and then destroys it, because how can anyone do it better now? If you think someone else has done it better, please do let me know and tell me the story, because I'd love to see how they sort of take this idea of 10 people on an island dropping dead and how you can improve upon what Agatha Christie did. The only stain upon the book is I don't think it had a very racist title. It did have an incredibly racist title. It was, if you want to sort of try rationalize it, the story is based off a poem which is by the same name, but the poem also has an incredibly racist title. And I think Agatha Christie was of a level of intelligence to understand that even though the story is based off this poem, she was of a level of intelligence to understand that this still was incredibly racist and incredibly derogatory, and she should have known better. So I'm glad it's been retitled. Book 2. I've got it here. Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. My words are violence, fate, and brutal. And, violence and brutal. It's without a doubt the most violent and brutal book I've ever read. I'm going to be rereading it again this year for the podcast. It is insane. The language is just so beautifully biblical, brutal. It is a story about this kid that gets swept along in this tide of violence, joining this gang of scalp hunters, scalping the Native Americans. It is, like I said, the most brutal story I've ever read. It is the most violent and visceral and sharp, and it's just such a great story, but just so violent, so dense as well. Cormac McCarthy has a very, very recognizable writing style, and it is on full display here. I mean, I would never recommend this book to someone as a first McCarthy. If you want to get into McCarthy, go read something like The Road, which is a lot more accessible. This is just brutal. And the language and his style just absolutely make it, in my opinion, the second best book of the 20th century. So Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, go check it out. And now my best book of the 20th century. If you're a long-time listener of the show or you know me at all, you've probably already guessed what it's going to be. It's not a difficult guess. It was only ever going to be one. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. Obviously 3 books, but we're counting it as one. My 3 words, did I even write 3 words? No, I wrote 1 word, perfection. A story that definitely speaks for itself. I mean, I could speak about this for quite literally hours. So I will spare you that and just say The Lord of the Rings is just, without a doubt, my favorite book of all time. It's a story I don't want to say read routinely because it is a big commitment, but I have, I think, read twice or 3 times now and listened to it twice as well. And will continue to read for the rest of my life. Obviously, the story is about Frodo trying to destroy the One Ring and defeat Sauron. But there's so much more in it, and Tolkien as well. His control of language and love of language is just on full display here, and just it's just perfection. I'm not going to say any more about it because we probably all know the story, and I don't need to say anything about it other than it is perfection. So that is my list. The 30 best books of the 20th century. Had a lot of fun creating it. As I said, it's a shifting list. Already, books would have been knocked off this list by other books, but that's okay. That's sort of the wonderful thing. It just means I'm continuing to read really great literature, and I can't complain about that. So, books 30 to 1. Obviously, episode today was books 10 to 1. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had fun listening along, and if you agree with the list, let me know. If you disagree with the list, let me know. If you want to tell me your favorite books, please let me know. But as always, thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I will see you next week. See ya.